My name is Ryan. I was 16 when I learned that some parts of the forest should never be entered at night. It was a dare. My friends and I had heard the stories about Fog Hollow, a part of the woods where people went missing. Some said it was a bottomless pit hidden by the mist. Others claimed something lived in it, something old, something hungry. But we were 16, and we didn't believe in ghost stories, so we went. The air was thick when we reached the hollow. A dense fog rolled in unnaturally fast, swallowing the trees. It muffled every sound, making even our footsteps seem distant. I stayed close to the others, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. "This is stupid," Emma muttered. "Let's go back." Scared. Jake grinned, but even he sounded uneasy. Then we heard it, a wet, gurgling breath. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the mist. Nothing. Then, from the fog, a whisper. "Ryan, .. I stiffened. It had spoken my name. Who said that? I called. My voice felt swallowed by the air, barely carrying "Don't answer." Then, the trees shifted. Not from wind, there was no wind. They moved as if something huge was pushing through them. Emma screamed. A shape emerged from the fog, massive and wrong. It had no face, no eyes, just a gaping mouth, stretched too wide. Its limbs were long, twisting like tree branches. It didn't walk, it glided. We ran. Branches slashed at my arms as I tore through the woods. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. The thing in the fog didn't chase us, it was everywhere. No matter how fast we ran, the mist thickened, pulling us deeper. Then Jake tripped. I turned, reaching for him, but something else was faster. A black, spindly arm shot from the fog, wrapping around his ankle. Jake screamed as it dragged him backward. His fingers clawed at the dirt, eyes wide with terror. Then he was gone. We didn't stop running until we saw the lights of town. The next day, the police searched for Jake. They found his backpack, torn and covered in something dark. But they never found him. That night, Emma and I sat in silence, barely touching our dinner. The weight of what had happened crushed us. No one would believe us. They'd say Jake got lost, that the fog played tricks on us. But we knew better. That night, the fog returned. I woke up to the sound of something shifting outside my window. I held my breath, listening. A whisper. "Ryan, .. come back." I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to stay still. My body trembled under the covers, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was deathly silent, but I could feel something outside. Watching. Then, a tapping on the glass, slow, rhythmic. I couldn't take it. I turned my head just slightly, just enough to see the window. A handprint was smeared against the foggy glass, but it wasn't mine. It was too large, too distorted, and it was on the inside. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, the handprint was gone, but I knew what I had seen. The fog wasn't finished with me. Emma left town a few days later. She wouldn't say why, but I knew. The whispers had come for her too. Now, every time the mist rolls in, I stay inside, doors locked, windows covered. But it doesn't matter, because no matter how hard I try to ignore it, the fog always finds a way back, and Jake's voice is always the one calling my name. My name is Owen. I was 15 when I found the cabin in the woods. I grew up near a vast stretch of forest, spending most of my summers exploring it. I knew every trail, every hidden stream, every old hunting blind. Or at least, I thought I did. One afternoon, I decided to take a new path. It was barely visible, overgrown and winding. The deeper I walked, the quieter the forest became. The air felt heavier, thick with something I couldn't name. That's when I saw it, a cabin, half hidden among the trees. The wood was aged, the windows caked in dust. There were no trails leading to it. No signs that anyone had been there. Years. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped closer. The door was slightly ajar. As I reached for it, a cold breeze slipped through the opening. My fingers hesitated on the handle. Then I heard a thud. From inside, I froze. The sound came again, followed by the slow creak of floorboards. Someone was in there. I should have run, but something held me in place. My breath caught as I peeked inside. The room was dark, filled with broken furniture and a thick layer of dust. The air smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic. Then I saw them, handprints small, like a child, smeared along the walls in streaks of red. A shadow shifted at the far end of the cabin. My blood turned to ice. The figure stood, impossibly still. I couldn't see its face, only the shape of it, tall, thin, wrong. Then, as if it knew I was watching, it took a single step forward. That was all I needed. I turned and bolted, crashing through the underbrush. The trees blurred around me. I didn't stop until I saw my house in the distance. I never told anyone about the cabin, but sometimes, at night, I hear footsteps outside my window, slow, deliberate, waiting for weeks. I tried to forget about the cabin, but something about that place wouldn't let me go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red handprints. I felt the weight of something watching me from the dark corners of that room. One night, I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I lay there, listening, I realized it wasn't. It was breathing, slow, heavy breaths, just outside my window. I turned over in bed, too scared to move. My curtains were drawn, but I could see the faintest shape beyond them, a tall, thin shadow standing in the moonlight. Then, something scraped against the glass. A single word, drawn into the condensation of my window: "Come back." My heart pounded. I shut my eyes tight, willing myself to disappear. When I finally worked up the courage to look again, the shadow was gone. But in the morning, when I stepped outside, I found footprints in the dirt beneath my window. Footprints that led back toward the woods. My name is Ethan. I was 16 when I realized something in the woods was following me. I used to love hiking alone. There was something peaceful about being surrounded by towering trees, the only sounds being birdsong and the crunch of leaves underfoot. But after what happened last summer, I never go alone anymore. It started on a late afternoon hike. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. I had wandered deeper than usual, but I wasn't worried. I knew these woods. Well, then, I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the steps were steady, deliberate, matching mine. I stopped, so did they. My heart pounded. I turned around slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. I told myself I was imagining it, and kept walking. But every few minutes, I heard it again. A crunch of leaves, a twig snapping. Always just behind me. By the time I realized the sun had set, I was nearly running. The trees felt taller, the path unfamiliar. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Then I saw it. A figure stood just ahead on the trail. At first, I thought it was a person, but something was wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. My breath caught in my throat. Then it moved. Not toward me, around me. 1 second, it was in front of me. The next, it was behind me. Then beside me. I ran. Branches tore at my arms. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. The footsteps followed, never rushing, never slowing. I tripped, falling hard. I scrambled up just in time to see a shadow pass over me. It loomed above, its face if it had one hidden in darkness. Then, it whispered, "You can't leave." I don't remember making it home. My parents found me on our porch at dawn, shaking, my clothes torn. I tried to tell them, but they didn't believe me. But I know it's still out there, because every time I step into the woods, the shadows move, and I know it's watching. For weeks after that night, I avoided the woods. Every time I passed the tree line near our house, a strange sensation crawled up my spine like something was waiting, watching. Then, one evening, I made a mistake. I was helping my dad bring in firewood from the shed at the forest's edge. The sun had already dipped below the trees, casting long, stretching shadows. My dad went inside, and for a moment, I was alone. That's when I saw it again, a dark silhouette, standing between the trees. I froze, gripping the last piece of firewood, so hard my knuckles turned white. The figure stood motionless, its head tilting slightly, as if it knew I had seen it. Then, it took a step forward. I turned and bolted toward the house, my heart hammering. But before I could reach the door, I heard something behind me, a whisper low, dragging Ethan, ... Don't run. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My dad glanced up from the fireplace. You okay? I nodded quickly, trying to steady my breath. But as I turned toward the window, my stomach dropped. The figure was standing at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the dim light, closer than before. The next night, I covered my windows, refusing to look outside. But it didn't matter. At exactly 3:07 a.m., I woke up to the sound of soft, deliberate tapping on my bedroom window. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Tap, 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 ... Then a whisper from the darkness outside. Let me in. I buried myself under the covers, squeezing my eyes shut. I stayed like that until morning, refusing to look. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to check the window. There were no footprints, no sign that anything had been there. But on the glass, traced in the condensation of my breath, was a single word: soon. My name is Matt. I was 17 when I learned that some voices in the woods aren't meant to be answered. Every summer, my uncle took me and my cousin Jake camping deep in the forest. It was tradition. No cell phones, no distractions. Us, the trees, and the night sky. We always camped in the same spot, a clearing near a narrow river that ran through the heart of the woods. That summer, everything felt normal. Until the second night, I woke up to the sound of crying. At first, I thought it was Jake, but when I turned toward his tent, I saw his silhouette, motionless in his sleeping bag. The sound was coming from the trees beyond our campsite. A child's cry. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. My skin prickled. We were miles away from any houses, any roads. No one else should have been out there. Then I heard it again. Help me, ... I sat up, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stay put. But the voice sounded so real, so desperate. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The air was cold, still. The crying continued, coming from the riverbank just beyond the trees. Jake, I whispered. Wake up. He groaned, rolling over. What? Do you hear that? Jake sat up, frowning. And then, as if the woods wanted him to hear it too, the voice came again. Help me, ... please, ... We exchanged nervous glances. It's probably just an animal, Jake muttered, rubbing his eyes. Coyotes make weird noises. But he didn't sound convinced. Then, the voice changed. Jake, ... Every muscle in my body locked up. Jake froze beside me. The voice had spoken his name. We stared at each other, the color draining from Jake's face. The crying had stopped. The forest was dead silent. Then, suddenly, footsteps. Fast, heavy, charging toward us from the trees. We scrambled back into the tent, zipping it shut, just as something slammed into the fabric. The entire tent shook. My heart felt like it would explode. Then, silence. We sat there, breathless, listening to nothing but the pounding in our chests. The next morning, we packed up and left without a word. My uncle laughed when we told him. Just your imagination, he said. But that night, back at the cabin, I woke up again. The crying was outside my window, and this time it was saying my name. My name is Eric. I was 18 when I lost my friends in the woods. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. 4 of us, me, Sam, Tyler, and Noah had planned a camping trip deep in the forest, miles from civilization. We packed light, brought enough supplies for 3 nights, and hiked to a clearing we found on an old map. The first night was perfect. We set up our tents, built a fire, and told ghost stories. The trees rustled softly in the wind, the stars bright above us. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. But on the second night, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of crunching leaves. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I heard something worse, whispering low. Urgent voices drifting through the trees. I peeked out of my tent. The fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to see the others still sleeping. Then, I saw movement. A figure stood just at the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was Noah, maybe up to use the bathroom. But then I realized, it was too tall, and its limbs were wrung too long, too thin. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, but I couldn't understand the words. My body locked up in fear. I blinked. The figure was gone. I barely slept the rest of the night. In the morning, I told the others, but they laughed it off. You probably dreamed it, Sam said, rolling his eyes. But I could see the unease in his face. I knew he didn't believe his own words. That evening, as we sat around the fire, the atmosphere felt heavier. The woods were completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the crackling flames. Then, Noah stood up. Guys, where's Tyler? We all looked around. His tent was empty. We searched the area, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. No footprints leading away. No sounds of movement in the trees. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Panic set in. We had no phone signal, no way to call for help. We stayed awake all night, taking turns keeping watch, but nothing happened. By morning, Sam was gone too. His sleeping bag was empty, his boots still by the fire. I couldn't breathe. I turned to Noah, my voice shaking. We have to leave. Now. We packed what little we could carry and ran. I don't know how long we ran, but the deeper we went into the forest, the more things felt wrong. The trees were too tall, their bark pulsing as if alive. The ground felt unstable, shifting beneath our feet. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe, and the whispers never stopped. Then, Noah grabbed my arm. Eric looked ahead of us, in a clearing that shouldn't have been. There was our campsite. The fire was still smoldering. Our tents stood exactly as we left them. It was impossible. We had run for miles. Then I noticed something worse. There were 4 figures sitting around the fire, motionless, shadowed. They turned their heads in unison. They had our faces. I don't remember what happened next. I just remember running. Branches cut my skin. My lungs burned, but I never stopped. I didn't look back. I made it out of the woods by sunrise. No one ever did. No one believed me. The police never found any trace of my friends. The camp, the supplies, everything was gone. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, calling my name, inviting me back. My name is Mark. I was 19 when I learned that some parts of the forest should never be disturbed. It started when my friends and I stumbled upon the lake. We had been hiking for hours, far off the marked trails, when we found Eton eerily. Still body of water surrounded by towering pines. The surface was so smooth, it looked like glass, reflecting the overcast sky above. No birds, no insects, just silence. This isn't on the map, Jenna said, frowning. None of us had seen it before, even though we had hiked these woods for years. Maybe it's a seasonal pond, Lucas suggested. Or maybe we just never walked this far. I wasn't so sure. Something about it felt ... wrong. But when Noah suggested we camp by the shore, no one objected. By nightfall, we had set up our tents and built a fire. The lake reflected the flames perfectly, an unmoving black mirror. That's when the first ripple appeared. A small, gentle disturbance near the center. Then another, and another dot. Something was moving beneath the surface. Fish, Lucas guessed, in a dead lake. Jenna shook her head. Nothing's living in there. But something was. The whisper started an hour later. Soft, distant voices carried across the water. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I realized they were coming from beneath the lake. Noah stood up, shining his flashlight toward the water. Who's there? The whisper stopped. Then, slowly, something rose from the lake. A figure, pale, drenched, motionless. We froze. My breath caught in my throat as more figures emerged, their bodies breaking the surface without making a sound. Their eyes were wrung empty, glassy voids reflecting our campfire. "We need to go," I whispered, but it was too late. The figures moved toward the shore, their wet limbs dragging through the water. Jenna screamed. Lucas grabbed his pack and ran, but he barely made it 10 feet before something reached out from the darkness and pulled him down. He was just gone, vanished beneath the surface without a ripple. We ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. The trees blurred past as I sprinted through the darkness, Noah and Jenna close behind. The whispers followed us, growing louder, more desperate. Then Jenna tripped. I turned just in time to see them pull her back. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She was just ... gone. Noah. And I didn't stop running until we saw headlights. We collapsed onto the road, barely able to speak. A passing truck driver found us and called for help. The police searched for days. They never found Jenna. They never found Lucas and the lake. It wasn't there. No maps, no records, just empty woods where the water should have been. But sometimes, when I pass by those trees, I hear them soft, distant whispers, calling from beneath the earth, begging me to come back. My name is Jason. I was 16 when I first saw it. Every summer, my family rented a cabin deep in the forest. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a place to escape the noise of the city. But that summer, something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. Even the wind barely rustled the leaves. I shrugged it off, until the first night. I woke up around 2 a.m., feeling uneasy. My window faced the tree line, and something told me to look outside. I wish I hadn't. A figure stood just beyond the trees, barely visible in the moonlight. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs hung limply at its sides, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. I couldn't make out any details, just a black silhouette against the trees. It wasn't moving. It was watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I told my parents, but they brushed it off. Probably a deer, my dad said. I knew it, WASN, single quotes. The second night, I woke up again. My stomach sank as I turned toward the window. It was closer, standing at the edge of the cabin's yard, completely motionless. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe my mind was playing games with me. But then, as I stared at it, I realized something. It had no face, just smooth, empty skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. I yanked the curtains shut and buried myself under the covers. I didn't sleep. The third night, I refused to look outside, but it didn't matter. I woke up to the sound of tapping. Soft, slow, rhythmic. At first, I thought it was coming from the window, but as I held my breath, I realized the truth. It was coming from inside the room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My fingers clutched the blankets as the tapping continued closer now, right beside my bed. Then, a whisper, Jason, ... Let me in. I squeezed my eyes shut, every muscle in my body locking up. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. The room felt frozen in time, the air thick and unmoving. Then, something brushed against my arm, cold. Wrong. I jerked away, rolling onto the floor. The tapping stopped. The room fell into silence, but I could feel something standing there, just beyond my vision. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, I finally forced myself to look. The room was empty. The air was warm again, normal. Maybe it had all been a dream. But as I turned toward the window, my heart stopped. On the glass, smeared in long, thin streaks, was a message. I found you. The next morning, my parents found me curled in the corner of the room, shaking. They took me home early. I never told them what really happened, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear the tapping, and I know it's waiting for me to come back. My name is Alex. I was 15 when I made the worst mistake of my life. If I stepped off the trail, I was hiking with my older sister, Claire, in the dense forest behind our grandparents' house. We had walked the same path 100 times, but that day, something felt different. The air was too still. The sounds of birds and insects had disappeared. It was like the forest was holding its breath. Then, I saw it. A narrow trail veering off from the main path. It was barely visible, overgrown with moss and weeds, as if no one had walked it for years. But something about it called to me. Alex, come on, Claire urged, already ahead. Don't wander off. But I couldn't stop staring. The trees along that path looked different, taller, their bark dark and twisted. Then I heard the whisper, this way, ... It was so soft, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. Before I could think, my feet moved on their own. Stepping off the safe path, the moment I did, the world changed. The air turned thick, heavy, like I was walking underwater. The sky above darkened even though the sun was still high. The trees loomed closer together, their branches tangled like grasping fingers. My stomach twisted with sudden nausea. Claire. My voice came out hoarse, wrong. I turned back to the main trail. It was gone. Only trees stretched behind me, endless and unfamiliar. My heart pounded. I ran forward, calling for my sister, but my voice didn't carry. The forest swallowed it whole. Then, I saw movement. A figure stood ahead, deep in the shadows between the trees. At first I thought it was Claire, but it was too tall, its limbs too long. Its head cocked unnaturally to the side, like it was studying me. Then it took a step forward. I turned and ran, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The ground beneath me felt wrung too soft, like something shifting beneath the soil. My feet sank slightly with each step. The whispers returned, closer now. Stay ... stay ... double quotes. I tripped, falling hard. When I looked up, the figure was right there. It had no face, just smooth, stretched skin, where eyes and a mouth should have been. I screamed. Darkness swallowed me. When I woke up, Claire was shaking me. I was lying on the normal trail, my hands and clothes covered in dirt. Alex, what the hell? She yelled. You disappeared for hours. But that was impossible. I had only been gone for minutes. At least, that's what I thought. As we rushed home, I felt something in my pocket. A small, blackened twig, twisted and gnarled. I didn't put it there, and last night, I woke up to find it lying on my pillow, still damp with something dark. My name is Ben. I was 17 when I learned that not everything in the forest is alive. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. My best friend, Liam, had convinced me to join him and a few others for a weekend in the woods. The place he picked was deep in the forest, far from any marked trails. No light pollution, no distractions, just nature, he had said. The first day was perfect. We set up camp, started a fire, and shared stories late into the night. But then, as the fire died down, I noticed something strange. The forest was silent. No crickets. No rustling leaves. No wind. Just ... Nothing. Liam laughed it off. Relax, man. It's probably the weather. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow, heavy, like someone circling our camp. I sat up, listening, my breath shallow. Liam, I whispered. No answer. I peeked. Outside, the fire was nothing but embers now, casting a weak, orange glow. Then I saw them. Figures standing just beyond the trees, perfectly still, watching. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. They were too tall, too thin. Their arms hung awkwardly at their sides, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. My skin crawled as I realized they had no faces. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, the figures were gone. I rushed to wake Liam, but he groggily waved me off. Dude, go to sleep. By morning, I started to believe I had imagined it. But then, as we packed up to hike deeper into the forest, I noticed something in the dirt. Footprints, but they weren't ours. That night, we set up camp again. I convinced myself it was all in my head. But as the fire burned low, the silence returned. The others didn't seem to notice, but I did, and then I heard it. A voice, soft, distant, coming from the trees. Ben ... Come closer. I stiffened. My blood turned to ice. The voice sounded familiar. It sounded like me. I grabbed Liam's arm. Do you hear that? He frowned. Hear what? The voice came again, closer this time. Ben ... Come, see. I turned toward the sound, and standing between the trees, inches from our campfire's dying light, was me, my own face staring back at me. Twisted in a grin, too wide for human lips. I blacked out. When I woke up, it was morning. Liam and the others were already packing. You okay, man? You passed out? I nodded weakly, forcing myself to stand. But as we left the campsite, I glanced back one last time. The trees were filled with figures, still, watching, waiting for us to return. My name is Daniel. I was 16 when I learned that the forest near my uncle's cabin wasn't normal. It started as a family trip. My parents thought a weekend away from the city would be good for me. My uncle's cabin was deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees that blocked out most of the sky. I had never liked the woods. There was something unsettling about how silent they could be. The first night, I woke up to whispers. At first I thought my parents were talking in the other room, but when I sat up, the sound was coming from outside. A hushed, rhythmic murmur, like a dozen voices speaking at once. I crept to the window, pushing aside the curtain. The trees were moving, not swaying in the wind. There was no wind. They were shifting, twisting, their branches curling like fingers. My stomach knotted. Then, I saw them. Figures stood among the trees, their shapes barely visible in the darkness. Tall, thin shadows that blended into the bark. They were whispering. One of them turned. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering. The whispering grew louder. I rushed to wake my parents, but they were deep asleep. When I turned back to the window, the figures were gone. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but something was wrong with the forest. The trees seemed closer. My uncle laughed when I mentioned it. The woods play tricks on you, kid. Don't stare too long. That night, I heard the whispers again. Closer this time. I locked the door and buried myself under the blankets, but it didn't help. The whispers slipped through the walls, curling around my ears like fingers. The floor creaked. The air turned ice cold. Then, my window slid open. I stopped breathing. A shadow moved just outside. My blood turned to ice. The whispering stopped all at once. Then, a voice spoke, clear, right outside my window. "Daniel, ... come with us." I bolted from my bed, yanking the curtains closed. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pressed my back against the wall, my hands shaking. Something tapped on the glass. I never looked. By morning, the whispers were gone, but when I stepped outside, I froze. The trees were closer than before, and in the dirt beneath my window, there were footprints that didn't belong to me.